Here we go. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Alexandria with Navigate HCR. We are excited to have everybody with us today for our latest and greatest update on the pandemic that's going on and how to work as an employer in this sort of environment. So we are going to give everybody just another few minutes here to go ahead and log on, make sure everybody's on, and then I will bring on our VP of Compliance, Angie, and we will get this thing started. So give us just a second here, okay? Okay, everybody, it's 1:31, so we're going to go ahead and get started here, and we're going to go ahead and go through just a couple things here real quick before we get started. I know a lot of you have been on our webinars previously. Here's just a brief overview of what we're going to go through. We're really glad that you're here, and please make sure if you have any questions to type them in the chat box, as that's how we know how to respond to you guys. And periodically we'll stop and address those questions. And we'll also go through some additional questions at the end. As many of you are aware, we are a full service compliance consulting company who offers a variety of services. And right now our main goal and intention is to be an education source for you guys. So we are super glad that you're here. And now I'm going to introduce Angie Sura, who is our VP of Compliance. She is a national speaker and educator and certified insurance counselor, as well as a certified professional compliance advisor. She has insurance and consulting experience, and she is going to blow us away with the knowledge of what's been going on most recently and hopefully get us up to speed. Angie?
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Welcome, everybody, to, I believe, our fourth installment. We are going to continue into next week. We're going to maintain the same schedule of Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2:30 Eastern. So stay tuned for those invites. They will be coming out shortly for you guys. I was pleased to see yesterday that the Department of Labor has issued some guidance on those items that we have the most questions on, which is the emergency paid sick leave, as well as the FMLA expansion. So I've taken the liberty of copying their information on the next few slides, and I just really want to help you guys gain as much clarity as possible. So we're going to unpack all of this. Don't forget that please post your questions in the chat box, and we will be checking in on those periodically throughout the presentation. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the employer size. The guidance is under 500 employees. Well, as we know, that can mean a lot of things. So let's take a look at what the DOL has provided in the way of guidance. So fewer than 500 employees. Now, what they mean by that is, in order to count how many employees you really have, you need to take into account how many full-time, how many part-time or variable, employees that are currently on leave are still considered active, so we need to count them. Any temporary employees, jointly owned employees, day laborers supplied by a temp agency. So that's basically all of your workers. In order to come up with your true count to determine, are you under 500 or not? Now, we know that when it comes to ACA reporting or COBRA, I mean, there are a variety of ways that we are to count what our true size is. So I wanted to make sure you guys are very clear on what they're looking at as far as how to calculate your size in regard to these two pieces of the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. Go ahead, Alex. So let's talk about the beginning and ending dates of this new law. I know that there are employees who have been furloughed or laid off or have been required by a healthcare professional to not come into work. I mean, that's been happening now for, gosh, at least the last week, if not longer. But the DOL is very clear that these provisions do not go into play until April 1st. And they're only going to apply to any leave taken between April 1st and December 31st. Now, out on the DOL's website, they have a really cool Q&A, and I thought this particular piece, which I copied right from their site, can my employer deny me paid sick leave if my employer gave me paid leave for a reason identified in the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act prior to the act going into effect? The answer is no. So unfortunately, for those of your employees who are unable to come to work even today, this new piece of legislation does not officially take effect until April 1st. So hopefully you're allowing your employees to use any PTO time that they may have available, to help them out during this challenging time that we're in. Next piece of guidance is the 30-day rule for the FMLA expansion. So traditional FMLA is you have to have worked for your employer for the last 12 months and accrued 1,250 hours. That isn't going to change. This rule is specifically speaking to the FMLA expansion. So the rule is the employee has to have been employed for the last 30 days. Well, I still think that leaves a lot to interpretation. So I was excited the DOL provided some specific guidance. What they're saying is the employee has been on payroll in any capacity for the 30 calendar days immediately prior to the day that the leave would begin. So if the leave, here's a great example, if the leave is going to happen on April 1st, then they would have needed to be on the employer's payroll as of March 2nd. So let's talk about counting hours for part-time employees. This legislation is going to be effective very quickly, and I know it's already leaving a lot of you scrambling to make sure you've got your processes and procedures in place, and we've had a lot of questions on part-time employees. So I pulled this right off of their guidance. The part-time employee is entitled to leave for his or her average number of hours worked in a 2-week period. Well, if their hours vary every week or even every day, especially if your place of employment has, multiple shifts and things like that, what they're saying is to take a look at the last 6-month average if possible. Now, if an employee has only worked for 3 months or 4 months, you can look at that average. But they're saying as a kind of a baseline, if possible, use a 6-month average if you need to calculate what their average daily hours would look like. Again, if you need to use a 3-month time period because that's all the longer they've worked, that's fine, but a 6-month average is what they're recommending if at all possible. Alex? So let's talk about how much are we paying each employee? what the guidance is saying, that in order to determine what their pay is, you need to look at their base pay, commissions, tips, piece rate, all of those different facets you need to take into account when you're determining what their amount of pay would be during their sick leave or their FMLA expansion. So it's requiring that you pay the employee for the hours the employee would have been normally scheduled to work, even if that's more than 40 hours in a week. Now they say that because, there may have been some scheduled overtime and they would have worked, 60 hours in that 1 week. The second week, you'd have to decrease, because at the end of the day, for that 2-week period, it's only 80 hours, whether it's more hours the first week or more hours the second week. 2 weeks or 10 days cannot be more than 50 hours. Now, keep in mind, there is a cap. So when you're doing your calculations for pay, if it's over the cap, it doesn't really matter. My recommendation and guidance to you are, when you're doing your calculations, that you're documenting that you're, if you're pulling historical records of hours worked, that, pull all that out, document it, and keep it all in a separate confidential employee file. It's always going to be critical, especially in something this new, and we're just getting, some guidance on it, that you keep very explicit records and keep those in a place, that you'll know where to get to them later if you need to come back and prove anything, because where it's going to come down to proving it is when it's time to, take the credit. Or perhaps at the end of the year, it's important that that documentation is in place. The DOL has given us posters, so there's definitely some rules around the poster requirements. There are 2 posters. One if you have federal employees, the other if you have non-federal employees. So it's going to be critical that you get these and post them out in your place of employment. And Alex, if you flip to the next slide, we'll talk about what the requirements are on how to get those published. So there's some options for distributing these new posters. Just like any other federal or state required poster, post it in a conspicuous place, in a common area that employees will visit, whether it's your lunchroom or your break room or, areas like that. You're also able to email these to all your employees to make sure that they get them. You can direct mail or snail mail to all of your employees, or you can post to your own internal or external, website, intranet, whatever it is. The goal is to make sure that you are getting it in the employee's hands. And I would also recommend that you please document the date that you either posted it, emailed it, handed it out, whatever it is you did, document that. At this time, there are no signature requirements. It's same concept as any other poster. Just a matter of making sure you document how you distributed it.
Angie, we have a couple questions I want to address real quick.
Yeah.
So going back a couple of slides, I apologize. So employers with less than 50 employees can ask for an exemption from which part of the emergency leave laws? Is it just paid family leave, or is it sick and paid family leave, but only for school closures?
It's going to be for the concept of how's the employer able to pay, the wages when obviously you are laying off or closing your doors because there's, no income coming into you as a business. So the exemption can be filed for either the sick or leave expansion. There is very minimal guidance right now on how to do that request. I am actively searching and waiting, and I've got some emails out to some of my government friends trying to see how I can get this answer for you guys, because it's definitely a question. I love that, you know, we've passed some great legislation to help everybody out there, but there's still a lot of uncertainty on, you know, how the business itself is going to be able to, you know, pay for these things, because it's essentially payroll. And at this point, I know a lot of folks are struggling to make payroll.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Next one. So what if we have an employee that's out at the present moment as a result of a positive diagnosis of COVID-19? How are we to handle his leave? This makes me assume that he'll not receive this paid sick leave. Is that correct?
Well, so if you have an employee out now, remember, traditional FMLA, there is, you know, the rule in there for a serious medical condition. So depending on the state of their condition, I would recommend that, you know, if they're not just out because the doctors asked them to quarantine, and even if they are, it can't hurt to send the traditional FMLA paperwork. If you are a business of 50 or more employees and you're required to follow the FMLA rules and regulations anyway, it would be wise to go ahead and send out the paperwork. Now, granted, they're not going to get that MedCert back to you in probably a reasonable amount of time because of, you know, everything else going on with healthcare professionals. But I think it's important that you start that process of getting that out there. Now, traditional FMLA is unpaid. So unless you have something in place for paid leave prior to COVID-19, if you have a collective bargaining agreement that requires payment when someone's on leave, you know, you've got to take all of those things into account as well. Now, depending on what their circumstance ends up being, they may be able to start getting the benefit after April 1st. It really is going to depend on what their specific situation is.
Thank you. Another one here. I've got a couple. We had a new hire that was supposed to start on March 16th, but because of the school closure, that took effect on his date. We told her we would contact her once the school reopens. How should an employer handle new hires that are in limbo during the closure?
That's a great question. And I'm sure lots of businesses are in that same predicament. If there are contracts of employment in place, or you know, anything that is evidence that yes, we are hiring this person, we've already made the offer, they've accepted the offer, they just haven't physically reported yet because, you know, it wasn't due. I think it would be wise to follow protocol on, you know, how you're treating other similarly situated employees. Now, keep in mind, they haven't worked for 30 days yet, because if they were to start on March 16th, that they wouldn't hit their 30-day mark. Now, the other concept is, and we're going to have to seek some additional guidance, is they weren't actively working, but there are extenuating circumstances. So I think that's, it's very questionable on what to do. You know, I always tend to err on the side of caution, and especially if you're, you know, in a industry, or you're, you know, you have a union situations, it may be wise to discuss with your union rep on, you know, how to handle this. And again, this is very, very new and uncharted territory. So we will certainly keep this question on the forefront as we continue to do our research and utilize our resources to try to get more information for you.
Let's see. Do you have to pay overtime for the first 50 hours in that example?
You wouldn't have to pay overtime unless they were supposed to get overtime at that point. So if you're in an industry where now is your normal overtime season, then it's a possibility. You know, you'd have to probably get with us separately, and we could talk through your specific industry and place of employment.
Okay, and then we have a question on poster requirements. While laid off employees are not included and needed not be notified, do furloughed employees fall under the same quote unquote laid off category?
A furloughed employee, I would say yes, based on the definition of furlough. It doesn't hurt to over communicate. Now, being that they are not actively working, there most likely wouldn't be, you know, payment to them in the event they claimed this type of leave. But I think it is always wise to give it out.
I think we're good for now. Go ahead. Let's go to the next one.
Awesome. So language requirements for the posters. Right now, they're only in English. There is no requirement yet to distribute these in any other language, even though many model notices and posters are available in various languages, and we go by the rule of thumb, well, what's the majority of your population, you know, what's their language? At this point, there is no requirement to provide in other languages. The DOL is working on translating these posters into the traditional other languages that we're used to getting from our government agencies. So which employees, now this is talking about only current employees. We just talked about furloughed. The definition of furlough does not make an employee inactive. So that's why I recommend we still give the poster to the furloughs. It's those that are actually laid off. They are, you know, following the definition of a layoff or a termination, which is not active. Okay, Alex. Awesome. So I wanted to spend a few moments talking about some other areas that we have had questions on. Now, at Navigate, we are in the compliance space, but our compliance expertise revolves more so around benefits and HR topics. So I've had some questions about retirement plans, and I wanted to pull my resources together and be able to give you guys some extra guidance on some of the things that our retirement partners are facing. So Rick Pummel, our technical director of the Retirement Plan Company, Rick is actually based in Ohio. I asked him a few different questions, and he was gracious enough to provide me with a quote. The question he's getting is, employers who sponsor Safe Harbor 401k plans are wondering if there is any way to temporarily stop the required contributions and pick them up later this year when things look better. And this was a question that we've seen several times, whether it be from you all out there or, you know, some of our own connections have asked this question. Rick's guidance is this, that there's no such thing as a pause, a temporary stopping and restarting during the plan year. They can stop their safe harbor contribution during the year only if either they are operating at an economic loss, there are formal steps to complete, so that may not be helpful, or two, the notice, their safe harbor notice contained the proper language to tell the participants the employer may stop the contributions. This would also require a 30-day advance notice. So at this point, and I know our employer friends out there are trying to do everything they can to keep their business open and keep their employees working as much as possible. And, you know, I'm sure they're looking at a variety of areas in order to reduce some expense to put it in other places. Unfortunately, so far, the retirement aspect of things, the 401k aspect isn't offering us really any leeway. Now, that's not to say the IRS isn't looking into that, but at this point, there's no help there. I also reached out to our good friend, Robert McLean, President and CEO of US Omni. Rob and his team work in the 403B and 457 world. So I, of course, reached out to Rob as my phone a friend and said, do you have a comment I can present to our listeners today who have the 403B and 457 types of plans? And he said that they're expecting a loosening of the 403B financial hardship withdrawal rules and the 457 unforeseen emergency rules, both of which allow for a distribution when a participant may not qualify for other transactions, giving them access to their plan assets. In the past, during catastrophic events, which are typically more local and often caused by acts of nature, such as hurricanes, fires, or floods, the IRS has accommodated plan participants through temporarily modifying the emergency distribution rules, assuring that those affected can quickly and easily access their account. Rob and his group are monitoring the situation and will advise employers of any changes and will modify their procedures to process applications in accordance with any regulatory changes. I keep Rob on speed dial, so I will be touching base with him regularly. He's always a wealth of information and guidance in the 403B and 457 space. So I will certainly be sure to convey what Rob finds out going forward. Alex, any new questions?
We have one question. I heard a furlough implies a 60-day notice to employees to be compliant. In times of economic distress, does that still apply, or does the nature of the pandemic warrant an exception?
So the 60-day notice requirement, whether it's a furlough or a layoff, all has to do with the WARN Act. There's a federal WARN Act, and there's also state mini WARN Acts. You would want to take a look at what your state has to say about that. We are happy to circulate the federal requirements, but at this time, I've seen no guidance on anything changing with the WARN Act. Now, I don't have the WARN Act up in front of me, and I certainly don't have it memorized, but the WARN Act has to do with really the concept of what percentage of your staff is getting laid off. So it was designed during the time when there were mass layoffs or plant closings, and how it was going to affect the economy and the communities in that in that area. It wouldn't surprise me if they don't come out with some sort of guidance, but again, it has to be a significant amount of your staff that are being laid off or furloughed in order to really enact that type of requirement. I'm happy to provide you some additional guidance. If you could drop an email to Alexandria after this presentation, so we have your contact information, and then I can touch base with you on what state you're in and get a little more detail on your specific situation, and I can help you based on what the current laws say for the WARN Act.
Okay. Oh, I've got another good one. On March 23rd, a part-time employee stated that the doctor advised him not to work because he's high risk. Do we still have to pay him the 2 weeks?
So that is a good question because the guidance from all of our healthcare professionals, the CDC, the WHO, the president, is to, be homebound if you're in one of those high risk situations, being immunocompromised or over the age of 70. And certainly as this virus is evolving and, we're seeing more and more individuals who are in younger age brackets that may not have had, you know, any high risk situation before. I'm sure there will be additional guidance and things coming out, but at this time, the legislation is a bit vague as usual. You know, when it comes to that they're high risk. So it's not necessarily, I think this legislation is based more so on that they've been exposed or they are, you know, experiencing symptoms of the virus. I'm not really seeing anything cut and dry that is saying if you're in a high risk pool, do you have any protection with the emergency FMLA, or, you know, I mean, with the emergency or the FMLA expansion, that has to do with childcare. But as far as the sick leave, you know, it's a little sketchy on that. I think we will need to possibly wait for a little more guidance and examples. I am part of a community with the DOL now that are doing some separate Q&A and asking for recommendations of where additional guidance is needed. I will absolutely post this out there on their site and see what kind of guidance I can get for you and for all of us. Great question.
I have a question on the poster, and then we have a couple that I'll save until the end. Are we able to wait to send the poster out until we get the new legislation on school districts? And how are we going to pay our employees? We're worried that this may cause concern by our employees and thinking that they won't get paid more so than it will help them.
You know, there really is, I know there's questions, a lot of questions from you know, the public sector about, you know, how would schools get, you know, the tax credit, because the way you all operate is differently. There's nothing out that says you won't, as a public school entity, get, you know, the help from the government. I think it's just going to be a bit of a different type of filing for you. I'm not clear yet. I really need to find a resource that I can have at my disposal in the tax world. Obviously, I'm not an attorney or a tax professional, but I have a lot of resources. So let me see what I can find. At this time, you can't withhold the poster notification. Now, you can certainly attach a memo to it that says, you know, additional guidance is needed, but there's been nothing stated so far that says, you know, a teacher isn't going to get paid. Now, keep in mind, in the law, it talks about what your collective bargaining agreements may say, because you still have to follow what's in the collective bargaining agreement. So, I mean, that's going to be, you know, a great time to really dive into the language of your union contracts and see what, you know, what is in there with regard to this situation. And I will continue to dig on what I can find and what resources I have to give you additional guidance if possible.
The other ones I'll save for the end. They're a little specific.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Stimulus package. Oh, I love the media. You know, there's 10 million blurbs out on the internet and, you know, what the media is presenting. Yes, there are two pieces of legislation, of course. The House is Bill 6379. The Senate is Bill 3548. It is my understanding that obviously the Senate passed their own, obviously they created it. It's going to the House to vote on. What is published right now for the text of the Senate Bill 3548 is not what's going to pass. They've been in negotiations nonstop to try to come to some sort of agreement. Now, I am going to wager an educated guess that they're going to use the basis of the Senate Bill 3548, not the House Bill 6379. But I have a pretty good feeling that some of the pieces within the 6379 may end up in the Senate bill. Some of the pieces within the Senate bill are going to be modified based on all of their back and forth in trying to get this passed. So at this point, the Senate bill has only passed the Senate. They wrote it. It's now in the hands of the House. We do not know what the changes are that have been done and what the House is going to vote on. Hopefully they will be voting on it today. I know they are discussing how they're going to do that vote because, as we've seen, some of our government officials are being quarantined or have contracted the virus, but they will figure out how to get a vote done. I'm thrilled that they are really working together. I think that all of the craziness in politics that's always been there forever and ever, I really feel they're putting quite a bit of that aside to try to do what's right for the American people. I wanted to pull out a few pieces that are in the proposed legislation. Again, I'm just pointing out some specific aspects because, again, it will change. And but I think the basis is going to remain relatively the same. So this is a $2 trillion piece of legislation. Payments directly to taxpayers, looking to get them some cash in their pockets. They're going to base the amount that they send to individuals on their 2018 tax filing. We've seen the individual making up to $75,000. We've seen that revised. We've seen the difference in, if you're above the 75,000. So I wouldn't even speculate how much that's going to end up being, but that is still in play as part of the bill that they're reviewing it. They're all in agreement to get some payment, some sort of financial help out to the American people. Another key point of this is extending unemployment, not only extending it by 13 additional weeks, but looking to include our self-employed folks out there, our freelancers, our furloughed employees, our gig workers. Traditionally, if you're self-employed, if you're a business of one person, there really wasn't any help to you in that kind of situation. So it's great to see that they've included that. What's scary is 3.3 million Americans filed for unemployment just last week. And I've seen tons and tons of media on, the exceptionally long wait times and, that it's taking them 2 and 3 days just to get a hold of, or of their unemployment office or, get things done online. So keep pressing along, folks. That's all I can say. You'll get in there, but it's staggering to me, the number. Certainly emergency loans to small businesses. Part of the goal of those emergency loans is so that it will help employers keep as many workers employed actively as possible. Government bailouts certainly are going to have strings attached. So I know we've all heard the president talk about, Boeing or the big, the big names that he wants to help either in the hotel space or airlines. The House had some significant issues with that, so the changes will result in what strings are attached to any bailouts, and certainly critical aid needing to be sent to hospitals and healthcare systems. Every day I look at the Johns Hopkins site and their map of what's going on. Governor Cuomo from New York is on daily. It's really just an awful time for all of us. And hopefully the government will continue to work as quickly as possible to help all of us, whether we're business owners, employees, healthcare workers, whatever. As soon as this package is passed, in whatever form it shakes out to be, know that we will be reading it page by page and disseminating that to you on our next webinar. Again, we will continue to hold those on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2:30 Eastern. So mark your calendars. As long as there are updates, guidance, and new information, we will continue to hold these. Please continue to email us your questions. We use these questions to share. Certainly we keep you anonymous, but we do use the context of the questions and our answers and guidance to support everyone out there that needs the support, that needs answers to these same questions. As we find trends in what your questions are, we will certainly put that into our actual webinar, our future webinars, so that we can do a real deep dive in whatever your question was. And a lot of you have the same questions, so I'm happy to be able to get those compiled and get the answers out to you all. Alex, do we want to go ahead and turn to questions?
Yep. Okay. So I have a couple of kind of specific questions here. It says one person tuned in a little bit late, says an employee went out prior to 4/1 due to childcare related on COVID. How on the 1st do we start paying that paid sick leave?
Yeah, so anybody prior to 4/1 that has not been able to come to work, as of 4/1, you will need to revisit what was their reason. Does it fall into one of the sick pay reasons? Is it going to fall into the new FMLA expansion? And if that is the case, then yes, you will need to begin doing that payment. Now, keep in mind that when it comes to the sick leave, if an employee is out because of the school or the childcare provider had to close due to coronavirus, that's a lesser amount. It is not their full pay. Certainly, your employees would have the option to use their own accrued PTO, which would give them 100% of of their wage, as would just like going on vacation type of PTO. So an employee may want to use their PTO to get their full pay. If it's the issue of the school or the childcare. But yes, you would want to do payroll to them just like normal. Again, you want to make sure you've got your payroll software updated with codes that specify whether this is the emergency paid sick leave or the FMLA expansion. Again, strict documentation on this, guys. It's very, very important. We would hate for you to be complying with the law and doing the payments via payroll like you're supposed to, and then there'd be an issue when it comes to collecting that back through the tax credits. Alex, what else do we have?
Let's see, we've got quite a few. So again, if we don't get to your question today, we are working on compiling these questions and sending them out after the presentation. Let's see. Who is exempt from the new FFCA?
Who is exempt? So at this point, employer sizes over 500. Those in the healthcare profession may be excluded, it says. So, for example, if a hospital says they're going to exclude, or if they say they're going to include, that's going to be a situation. Not a ton of guidance. In my DOL room, I've seen a lot of people posting the request for additional guidance on, you know, the breaking it all the way down to what's the definition of a healthcare provider. You know, it's in this kind of situation where every word counts, and you've got to dive into, you know, the definitions for every word. So we hope to see more guidance come out on that. As far as the 30-day rule, have they worked for you in the last 30 days? So there's not a ton of exclusions. Now, if you have a business with less than 50, you can look to request an exemption of some sort if it would jeopardize the viability of your business.
Okay. How can we prove an employee has children and is taking sick leave for childcare? Can we ask for verification?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think that yes, you can request supporting documentation, and I will attribute this to a traditional FMLA type of situation, because their rules are pretty specific. So even though this is different scenarios than FMLA, I would still lean towards what types of guidance do we have from the government in similar situations. So if you look at FMLA, you know, you're certainly allowed to request proof of things. So whether it's, you know, a medical certification, or, you know, obviously if a school is closed, that's readily published that you can capture that kind of information. But to prove that they have, you know, children, which would be minor children, yeah, that's certainly something that you can request proof on. If you have no idea that whether they legitimately have children, you can request that. Now, what would that supporting documentation look like is another question. My first thought would be that piece on their, you know, tax return that shows the dependents they're claiming, but that may not necessarily be allowable. So we will slate that for a little bit deeper dive with the DOL and see if they've answered that particular question yet.
Okay, thank you. And let's see, we've got a little bit more time. Have you heard anything about paying employee benefit premiums when laying off or because of furlough?
I've had that question quite a bit, and trust me, I have been digging everywhere I can in all of my phone a friend situations for this. So what I'm seeing and hearing so far is it's going to be up to the rules of that state and how the carrier's plan documents are listed. Furloughing generally will allow you to maintain their benefits for a period of time. Again, that's going to be how the carrier's plan document is listed. There are pieces in the new law regarding the tax credits that they're allowing employers to include the amount the employer would be contributing towards health insurance premiums, which makes perfect sense since this is a global health pandemic. The last thing we want is our folks to not have health care. So yeah, it's definitely interesting.
Do you have any SOP for employees coming back to work?
Well, As far as employees coming back to work, I'm not sure what they mean by SOP.
Standard operating procedure.
Oh, thank you. So up in the DOL. Really, I would follow the same type of guidelines that you would for anyone returning back to work from a medical leave. Now, I would also add to that, obviously a doctor's note that says they're cleared. We certainly don't want employees coming back to work until they follow the COVID protocol of, you've been symptom free and no fever for more than 24 hours, I think it is. So there's going to be a few more little tweaks to the traditional, you need a doctor's note to come back, because the last thing we want to do is, have someone come back who is better or symptom free, but they may still be carrying. So I think it would be important to check out the CDC guidance on, when is someone considered truly recovered?
Let's see. Can the FMLA expansion for childcare be taken intermittently?
I don't see why not. At this point, it's not saying that it has to be a full-on leave. So I would follow the traditional rules around FMLA of intermittent versus full, or even a reduced schedule. That's totally possible, especially with so many families being unable to work, that if they're in a situation where they want to, dad's going to stay home this day and I'm going to work this day, he's going to work the next day, I'm going to stay home. I mean, they're definitely, we can use intermittent for this.
Okay. And how does an employer under 50 employees file for the exemption?
That is an awesome question. I keep looking at that every single day, and so far there is no guidance on what to do. Okay. And at this point, I'm sure there will be a phone number to call, and right now you can't even get a hold of the IRS. So I hope they post something online that you can complete, but there is nothing published yet on how to request that.
Here's a good one. Will workers' comp cover families if an employee brings it home?
I love this question, and here's why. For those of you who don't know me personally, my husband is a commercial property and casualty insurance expert. And if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see his really interesting little video that he put together yesterday in his home office about business income. It's kind of interesting, but he and I've had these conversations, obviously back and forth throughout this crisis. And when I asked him previously about workers' comp, he said that it would probably be very, very challenging to prove that, the employee contracted the virus at work. Because to have a workers' comp claim, it has to happen at work type of situation. So, I'm sure you may get employees who want to file a workers' comp claim, and you should certainly let them file their claims as they ask. But I don't know that workers' comp would really pick up. It's so, sketchy right now as to how would you even prove how an employee contracted the virus. It's it's on surfaces, it's in the air, on the droplets, and I don't know. It's interesting. I'll tell you what though, I will ask for a blurb from him for our next webinar. If he's a resource we can use to help answer questions, absolutely.
Use all that we have.
Yeah.
Have clear instructions been outlined for how the employer is supposed to recoup the costs or obtain the tax credit for those employees out on this specific leave?
So at this point, what the guidance is that when you are doing your quarterly payroll tax, your 941s, that's where you're going to deduct the value of what you have paid in these sick leave payments or the FMLA expansion payments. There are some great examples from the DOL on this. When I fill out this Q&A hard paper or hard copy, I will throw in there those examples. Not a ton of guidance yet, but at this point, what we know is that it's to be done on the 941. You're essentially gonna, if you owed $5,000 in that quarter, but you've paid out $3,000 in these sick wages, and your contribution as the employer to the health insurance, you would deduct that $3,000 and you'd only owe $2,000. Where the vagueness really is, what if my 941 said I owed $5,000, but I've spent $10,000? So you're at a negative. How do you get that? That's the question of the day. And I'm actively watching for that answer.
Okay, I've got another specific one here since we need to start wrapping up. Mm-hmm. For nursing homes that are being considered as an individual entity, but under a corporation, how are they determining the amount of employees? One small nursing home is 58 employees, but the corporation of all 8 homes is well under over 500.
So let me grab those rules really quickly. Because they came out yesterday, so unfortunately I have not memorized them just yet, but they have some, it's not great guidance, but they have some guidance on it. Let me take a quick peek and see if I can grab this for you really quickly, because yes, there are issues with common ownership and joint employers, and how do we count that? So I think first of all, you would have to know, is this a parent-child relationship where the head corporation is really the parent and all of the individual nursing homes are children of that? So they may run independently, but they're, based on the IRS rules, they are considered a child company. So here's what the guidance says: where a corporation has an ownership interest in another corporation, the 2 corporations are separate employers unless they are joint employers under the FLSA, Fair Labor Standards Act, with respect to certain employees. If 2 entities are found to be joint employers, all of their common employees must be counted in determining whether paid sick leave must be provided under the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act and expanded FMLA. So that would lead me to believe, and now obviously I will go down the rabbit hole of diving into the FLSA just to be safe, that would lead me to believe if it's truly a situation similar to how we look at ACA reporting, if this is truly a parent-child relationship, and we may have to dig all the way into, okay, who owns individually the corporation, and are those exact same owners the owners of all of the children companies too? Or, do the children companies have some other owners, additional owners? We may have to dig all the way down into that to determine which are considered commonly owned and become joint employers, but that is a distinct possibility that would put them over 500.
Let's go for the last one here. What's the lesser amount to be paid to full-time employee who cannot work because the children do not have school?
So the cap is $200 per day. So for the 10 days of sick leave, that is, thank you, the $2,000. If they then rolled into the FMLA expansion, that would be a total of $12,000. And again, the FMLA would be over 12 weeks if they had 12 weeks of FMLA available. Remember, this isn't an additional 12 weeks. So if they've already used FMLA for a traditional FMLA situation, then they only have enough FMLA left, based on 480 hours minus what they've already used. All right. Thank you guys so much. Your questions help us to determine where to really dig deeper, so please keep them coming. Again, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Now, depending on what new and better guidance come out next week, we may only do a half an hour and leave the other half an hour for questions. It's really based on what comes out. And I really think for the next couple of weeks, we're going to get a ton of new information and new guidance, especially because April 1st is right around the corner, and there are still millions and millions of questions. So keep them coming. Email alexandria@navigatehcr.com. Feel free to email me, Angie@navigatehcr.com. We are here to help in any way that we can. Certainly, if your questions are outside of the realm of our expertise, ask them anyway. We may have a phone a friend resource that is an expert in that area that we can call upon to assist. It takes a village, and we are happy to be a part of that village. So thank you so much. Stay safe out there. And if anything critical comes up before Tuesday, we will host another webinar if needed. Follow us on social media. There's always a ton of, fast breaking information. As we get it, we're popping it out on social media as quickly as we can. Again, any resources we find out there that are great and we feel would be valuable, we'll share those so that if you're, linked with us, you can see it. So please stay in touch, be safe, and we will talk to you all soon.
Yep, make sure we will keep an eye on your email, everybody. We will send everybody out invitations for next week with the links on how to join and all of how to add to your calendar and all that fun stuff. Also, if you don't get emails, please make sure you keep an eye on our social media, either Angie or myself or Navigate HCR. We are posting updates on how to log on to these webinars regularly. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and let us know. We are still working on answering the questions from Tuesday. Bear with us as we're trying to prepare for what's coming, as well as make sure you guys are informed on what we've already talked about. So we appreciate you guys, and we'll be here for you on Tuesday. Have a great weekend and stay safe.